The sacrifice of the Aurora had bought them precious minutes, but the cost weighed heavily on everyone. The explosion had temporarily disrupted the nanite swarm, scattering its formation and slowing its advance. Yet, as the survivors regrouped on the beach, they knew the reprieve wouldn't last long. The black tide was already beginning to reform, its dark tendrils creeping outward once more. Kayla sat near the water's edge, her glowing skin dimmed by grief. She stared at the horizon where the Aurora had vanished, her heart aching for the lives lost. Captain Hayes and his crew had given everything to protect them, and their bravery couldn't be forgotten. But how could they honor such a sacrifice? How could they turn this fleeting moment into something lasting? Lieutenant Theo Calder approached her quietly, his expression somber. "You okay?" he asked softly, sitting beside her. Kayla shook her head. "No," she admitted, "but I can't afford to fall apart right now. Not when there's still work to do." Calder nodded, understanding her pain all too well. He had worked alongside the crew of the Aurora, shared meals with them, laughed with them. Their loss felt like a hole torn through his own soul. "They believed in us," he said after a pause. "We owe it to them to keep going." As dawn broke, Captain Elise Marquez called everyone together for an emergency meeting. Her face was pale from exhaustion, but her eyes burned with determination. "We've been reactive up until now," she began, addressing both humans and Velara. "But reacting isn't enough anymore. We need to take control of this fight and finish it." She pointed to a holographic projection of the star system, highlighting the unstable sun at its center. "The nanites feed on energy, especially concentrated sources like stars. If we can contain the collapse of our earlier device within the star itself, we might trigger a chain reaction that destroys the swarm permanently." Elder Terran frowned, his deep voice laced with skepticism. "And what happens to the star? Will it survive?" Elise hesitated before answering. "It's risky. The containment process will destabilize the star further, possibly causing a supernova. But if we don't act, the swarm will spread beyond this system, consuming other worlds, including Earth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kayla stepped forward, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "If we lose the star, we'll lose our world anyway," she said firmly. "At least this way, we have a chance to save others. Isn't that worth the risk?" Her words resonated with many, though fear lingered in their expressions. Elder Terran exchanged a glance with another elder before nodding slowly. "Very well," he said. "Let us prepare for whatever comes next." The plan required precision and coordination. Using the remaining ships, they would deploy antimatter charges around the star, creating a controlled implosion designed to trap the nanites in a gravitational singularity. It was a desperate gamble, but it represented their best, and only, chance. As preparations began, Kayla and Calder worked side by side again, their bond stronger than ever. Together, they calibrated the final settings on the remaining devices, ensuring every component functioned perfectly. "You're amazing under pressure," Calder remarked during a rare quiet moment. Kayla smiled faintly. "So are you. Maybe we're not so different after all." Their brief exchange brought a flicker of warmth to the otherwise grim atmosphere. Around them, humans and Velara moved with purpose, united by a shared goal. For the first time since the crisis began, there was a sense of clarity, a spark of hope cutting through the darkness. By the time night fell, everything was ready. The fleet assembled near the star, each ship carrying a piece of the puzzle that would determine their fate. As they prepared to launch, Elise addressed the group one last time. "This is it," she said, her voice echoing across the comms. "Stay focused, stay strong, and remember, we're doing this not just for ourselves, but for everyone who came before us and everyone who will come after." With those words, the countdown began. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, victory felt within reach. The decision to move forward with the plan weighed heavily on everyone. For the Velara, dismantling their coral cities felt like tearing apart their very soul. The coral wasn't just a resource. It was alive, pulsing with energy and memories passed down through generations. Its glowing spires were sacred, woven into songs and stories that defined their culture. To destroy them seemed unthinkable. Kayla stood at the edge of one such city, her heart aching as she gazed at the towering structures. Bioluminescent patterns danced across their surfaces, casting soft light onto the ocean floor. She could almost hear the whispers of ancestors echoing through the currents. This place was home, not just for her, but for all Valara. And now it had to be sacrificed. Elder Terran approached her, his presence calming yet somber. "You fought hard for this plan," he said gently. "But are you ready to see it through?" Kayla swallowed her hesitation. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "But I know we have no choice. If we don't do this, everything we love will be lost anyway." Terran nodded slowly, his deep blue markings glowing faintly in the dim water. "Then let us honor what we must give up. Let us remember why we're doing this." With those words, Kayla turned to face the gathered crowd of Valara. Her voice trembled at first, but soon grew steady. "Our corals are more than stone and light. They're life itself. They carry our history, our dreams, our hopes. But today, they will become something greater, tools to save us. By giving them up, we ensure that future generations can sing again beneath these waves." Her speech stirred the crowd. Though sorrow lingered in their eyes, resolve began to take root. Together, they set to work, carefully extracting pieces of coral while chanting ancient songs of gratitude and farewell. It was a bittersweet ritual, filled with both grief and hope. Meanwhile, aboard the human ships, the mood was equally somber. Captain Elise Marquez ordered her crew to begin stripping essential systems from their vessels. Power cells, navigation modules, even parts of the life support systems. Every piece salvaged brought them closer to completing the device, but also pushed them farther from any chance of returning home safely. Lieutenant Theo Calder worked alongside the engineers, his hands stained with grease as he helped dismantle components. Despite his determination, doubt gnawed at him. What if their efforts weren't enough? What if they gave everything only to fail? As he paused to wipe sweat from his brow, Ensign Riley approached him. "Do you think it's worth it?" Riley asked quietly, his tone heavy with uncertainty. "Giving up so much? For them?" Calder looked at him, his expression thoughtful. "It's not about them or us," he replied. "It's about doing what's right. We came here to help because no one else would. Walking away now would make us no better than those who ignored their calls for aid." Riley hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "You're right. I just hope it works." By the end of the day, both groups had made significant progress. The Valara delivered crates of radiant coral fragments to the humans, their glow dimming slightly as they were removed from their natural environment. Humans, in turn, presented the completed framework of the device, a massive construct designed to channel the coral's energy into a concentrated burst capable of disrupting the nanite swarm. When the two teams met to integrate their contributions, an unspoken bond formed between them. Kayla placed a hand on the device, feeling its hum resonate through her skin. "This is our hope," she said softly. "All of us together." Elise stepped forward, placing a hand beside hers. "And we'll fight for it, together." For the first time since the crisis began, there was a sense of unity. Both species had given up pieces of themselves, trusting that their combined strength might tip the scales in their favor. But the hardest part still lay ahead. As night fell, the black tide crept closer, its shadow looming over the horizon like a predator stalking its prey. Tomorrow, they would face it head-on, and nothing would ever be the same again. The aftermath of the battle was both solemn and celebratory. The Valara's ocean shimmered once more under the restored light of their sun, but the scars of the conflict remained etched in every heart. Lives had been lost, both human and Valaran, and those sacrifices weighed heavily on everyone. Yet, amidst the grief, there was an undeniable sense of triumph. Together, they had faced extinction and emerged victorious. On the shore where it all began, humans and Valore gathered for a ceremony to honor the fallen. Captain Hayes and the crew of the Aurora were remembered with reverence, their names carved into a stone monument erected by the Valore. Bright coral fragments surrounded the memorial, glowing softly as if alive, symbolizing the unity between the two species. "We will never forget your bravery," Elder Terran said during the ceremony, his voice resonating across the waves. "You gave everything so that we might live. Your sacrifice will be sung in our songs for generations." Captain Elise Marquez stood beside him, her eyes glistening with unused tears. "They weren't just heroes to us," she added. "They were family. And their courage reminds us why we fight. For each other, no matter how different we may seem." As the ceremony concluded, Kayla approached Calder, who was packing up equipment near the edge of the water. His ship, like many others, had been stripped bare to complete the mission, leaving them stranded far from Earth. "What happens now?" Kayla asked, her tone tinged with concern. Calder smiled faintly, though exhaustion lined his face. "Now, we wait. Reinforcements from Earth will come eventually. Until then, we stay here, with you." Kayla's heart swelled at his words. "You'd really do that? Stay here, even after everything?" "Of course," Calder replied. "This isn't just your home anymore. It's part of ours too." To seal their bond, the Valore gifted humanity a living piece of their world, a fragment of bioluminescent coral capable of generating clean energy. Elder Terran presented it to Elise during a private meeting, explaining its significance. "This coral carries the spirit of our people," he said. "It is a symbol of gratitude and a promise. If you ever need us, call upon us. We will answer." Elise accepted the gift with deep respect. "Thank you," she said. "And know this, we'll return. Not just to check on you, but because we found allies in you. Friends." In the days that followed, repairs began on the remaining ships while humans and Valore worked side by side to rebuild what had been lost. Kayla spent much of her time teaching Calder about Valoran culture, their songs, stories, and traditions. In turn, Calder shared tales of Earth, describing its vast landscapes and diverse peoples. Their connection grew stronger, bridging the gap between their worlds. Before departing, Elise addressed the entire population of Valore one last time. Standing on the beach, she looked out over the glowing waters and spoke with unwavering conviction. "You showed us what it means to stand together against impossible odds," she said. "Because of you, humanity has learned that hope can thrive even in the darkest times. And because of us, you've seen that help can come from unexpected places. This alliance changes everything, for both our species and the galaxy." As the human fleet prepared to leave, Kayla swam alongside Calder's ship, waving farewell. Though sadness lingered, she felt a profound sense of pride. Humanity's arrival had sparked a new chapter for her people, one filled with possibility and partnership. Far above, the stars twinkled brightly, silent witnesses to the bond forged between two vastly different species. Against the vastness of the universe, humanity and the Valore stood united, proving that even in the face of despair, acts of courage and compassion could ignite change. The story of their alliance spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring others to reach out and connect. For the first time in centuries, the silence among the stars began to fade, replaced by whispers of hope and the promise of brighter tomorrows. The next morning, the humans and Valore worked side by side, their movements cautious but purposeful. The beach had become a makeshift command center, filled with humming machines, glowing screens, and strange tools that neither species fully understood yet. Lieutenant Theo Calder knelt near the edge of the water, holding a small device that pulsed faintly as it analyzed samples from the blackened patches in the ocean. Kayla hovered nearby, her luminous skin reflecting the dim sunlight. "What does it say?" she asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and fear. Calder adjusted his glasses, squinting at the readings. It's complicated, he admitted. This isn't natural. Whatever is poisoning your waters, it's not just decay or pollution. It's something far more dangerous. Kayla frowned. Dangerous how? Before Calder could answer, Captain Elise Marquez approached, carrying a tablet displaying data collected overnight. Her expression was grim. We've identified the source of the problem, she said, addressing both Calder and Kayla. It's a swarm, nanoscopic machines designed to consume energy. They're feeding on your sun and spreading through your oceans. A swarm, Kayla repeated, her voice rising. Machines. How is that possible? Elise sighed, crouching down to meet Kayla's gaze. We believe it's a remnant of an ancient war, a weapon created by some long-gone civilization. These machines were likely abandoned after their creators disappeared, but they're still active. Left unchecked, they'll drain every ounce of energy from this system before moving on to others. Kayla felt a chill run through her body, despite the warmth of the water around her. So, we're facing something older and smarter than us. Not smarter, Calder interjected, trying to sound reassuring. Just programmed. Machines follow rules, even if those rules are destructive. If we can figure out how they work, we might be able to stop them. But can you? Another Valoran interrupted. It was Elder Terran, the same elder who had questioned Elise earlier. He floated closer, his deep blue markings glowing faintly in the fading light. You speak of stopping a force beyond comprehension. What makes you think you stand a chance? Elise straightened, meeting Terran's skeptical gaze. Because we have no other choice, and because we're not alone anymore. Together, we have knowledge, resources, and determination. That gives us a fighting chance. Terran studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. Share what you know, and we will share ours. Perhaps our combined wisdom will reveal a path forward. Over the next few hours, the two species exchanged information. The Valara explained the patterns of the black tide, the way it spread faster during certain tides, and seemed to avoid areas rich in bioluminescent coral. Humans, in turn, shared advanced scanning technology and theories about the Nanite's behavior. Kayla found herself drawn to Calder, watching as he pieced together fragments of data like a puzzle. Why do you care so much? She asked suddenly, startling him. He looked up, surprised by the question. Care about what? Us, she said simply. Our world. Why risk everything to help strangers? Calder hesitated, then smiled faintly. Because it's what we do. Humanity has made plenty of mistakes. We've hurt each other, destroyed ecosystems, nearly wiped ourselves out. But when we see someone in trouble, we try to help. Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's hope, or maybe... He paused, searching for the right words. Maybe it's because no one should face the end alone. Kayla stared at him, her glowing eyes softening. For the first time, she truly believed these humans might make a difference. As night fell, the team gathered around a holographic map projecting the extent of the black tide. It stretched farther than anyone had realized, creeping toward vital coral cities and threatening to engulf the planet entirely. We need a plan, Elise said firmly. And we need it fast. The weight of the task ahead hung heavy over the group, but beneath it lay a flicker of resolve. Together, humanity and the Valara would face the enemy head-on, even if it meant risking everything. The days that followed were tense and exhausting. Humans and Valara worked tirelessly, pooling their knowledge to devise a plan against the black tide. But as progress inched forward, cracks began to form within both groups. Doubts simmered beneath the surface, threatening to unravel the fragile alliance they had built. Among the Valara, whispers of distrust spread like ripples through water. Many questioned why they should place their fate in the hands of outsiders, especially humans, who seemed so frail compared to their own resilient species. They'll fail, one elder muttered during a council meeting deep underwater. And when they do, we'll be left with nothing but ruins. Kayla bristled at such remarks. She had grown close to Lieutenant Theo Calder over the past few days, learning from his determination and resourcefulness. To her, the humans weren't just strangers. They were partners willing to risk everything for a world not their own. Still, she struggled to convince others. They've already done more than anyone else, Kayla argued passionately, her glowing skin flickering with emotion. While other species ignored us, these humans came. They're trying. Isn't that worth something? Her words fell on deaf ears for some, but others listened. Elder Terran, though skeptical, acknowledged her point. Perhaps you're right, Kayla, he said, but hope alone won't save us. We need results, and soon. On the human side, tensions ran just as high. Captain Elise Marquez faced growing unrest among her crew. Supplies were running low, and the harsh conditions of Valara's environment took a toll on their equipment and morale. Some wondered if aiding the Valara was worth sacrificing their own safety. We're stranded out here, muttered Ensign Riley, pacing near the edge of the beach. If we keep giving away resources, how are we supposed to get home? What happens if this mission fails? Marquez turned to face him, her sharp eyes cutting through his complaints. Failure isn't an option, she said firmly. We didn't come here to turn back because things got hard. These people are counting on us. And if we walk away now, what does that say about us? About humanity. Her words silenced the dissent. For now. But the unease lingered. The crew knew the stakes were impossibly high. Yet, even amid the tension, moments of connection began to bridge the gap between species. One evening, as the dim sunlight faded into twilight, Kayla joined Calder by the shore. He was tinkering with a broken scanner, muttering under his breath as he fiddled with its circuits. She watched silently for a moment before speaking. "Do you ever feel overwhelmed?" she asked softly. Calder glanced up, surprised by the question. "Every day," he admitted with a wry smile. "But I guess that's part of the job. You?" "All the time," Kayla replied. "It's hard to believe we can fix something so big. Sometimes I wonder if we're just delaying the inevitable." Calder set down his tools and looked at her earnestly. "Maybe. But even if we can't stop it completely, every second we buy is another chance for someone to find a solution. That's why we keep going, even when it feels impossible." His words resonated deeply with Kayla. For the first time, she realized that hope wasn't about certainty, it was about refusing to give up, no matter how dark the odds seemed. By the end of the week, a risky plan began to take shape. Using data gathered by both teams, they identified a potential weakness in the nanite swarm, its reliance on concentrated energy sources. If they could create a powerful enough disruption, a controlled explosion, they might lure the swarm into collapsing inward, neutralizing its threat. But implementing the plan would require sacrifices. The Valara would need to dismantle parts of their sacred coral cities to power the device, while the humans would have to strip vital systems from their ships, leaving them stranded light years from Earth. When the proposal was presented, silence fell over the group. It was a desperate gamble, but it was also their only chance. Finally, Kayla spoke, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "If we don't try, we lose everything anyway. Let's do this, together." Her courage inspired others. One by one, both humans and Valara nodded in agreement. United by shared purpose, they prepared to face the greatest challenge of their lives. The morning dawned cold and gray, the dimming sun casting long shadows over Valara's ocean. The air was thick with anticipation as humans and Valara prepared to deploy the device that carried their last hope. The massive construct stood on a floating platform near the edge of the black tide, its surface shimmering faintly with energy drawn from the sacred coral fragments. Around it, the two species worked in tense silence, each movement deliberate and precise. Kayla swam close to the device, her glowing skin reflecting off its metallic frame. She traced her fingers along its edges, marveling at how seamlessly human technology blended with Valaran ingenuity. "It's beautiful," she murmured, half to herself. Lieutenant Theo Calder overheard her and smiled faintly. "Let's just hope it works," he said, adjusting one of the control panels. His voice betrayed a mix of determination and anxiety. Captain Elise Marquez supervised the final preparations, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. "We've done everything we can," she told the group. "Now, it's up to us to get this thing into position." Positioning the device wasn't going to be easy. To disrupt the nanite swarm effectively, they needed to place it directly within the heart of the black tide, a swirling vortex of darkness that pulsed with an eerie, unnatural energy. It was dangerous territory, and both humans and Valara knew the risks. As the team loaded onto submarines and submersibles designed for deep-sea exploration, Kayla volunteered to lead the mission alongside Calder. Her familiarity with the ocean currents made her invaluable, while his technical expertise ensured the device would function correctly once deployed. Elder Terran initially objected, fearing for her safety, but Kayla insisted. "I have to do this," she said firmly. "For all of us." The journey into the abyss was harrowing. As they approached the black tide, the water grew colder and darker, the light from their vehicles barely penetrating the oppressive gloom. The nanites reacted violently to their presence, swirling faster and creating chaotic eddies that threatened to pull them under. "This is insane," muttered one of the human pilots, gripping the controls tightly as their craft shuddered against the force of the current. "We're almost there," Calder reassured him, though his knuckles were white from gripping his seat. He glanced at Kayla, who sat beside him, her luminous skin providing the only source of warmth in the suffocating darkness. Finally, they reached the core of the black tide. The device was lowered into position, its hum growing louder as it began absorbing energy from the surrounding chaos. Kayla and Calder exited their vessel to make final adjustments, swimming through the turbulent waters with steady strokes. "It's working," Calder shouted over the roar of the nanites, his voice crackling through their communication devices. But before they could retreat, something went wrong. A sudden surge of energy destabilized the device, sending shockwaves rippling outward. One of the submarine tethers snapped, and debris flew everywhere. "Get back to the ship," Eliz's voice barked urgently in their ears. Kayla hesitated, seeing a critical panel flicker dangerously. If it failed, the entire mission would collapse. Ignoring Calder's protests, she swam toward it, her movements swift and sure. "I'm not leaving without finishing this," she called back, her voice steady despite the danger. Calder followed her, unwilling to let her face the risk alone. Together, they stabilized the device just as another wave of nanites surged toward them. "We need to go, now," Calder yelled, grabbing her arm. With no time to waste, they raced back to their craft, narrowly avoiding being pulled into the vortex. As the submarine ascended, the device activated behind them, emitting a blinding pulse of light that illuminated the dark waters. For a moment, there was silence. Then, cheers erupted among the crew above. But the fight wasn't over yet. The black tide had been disrupted, but not destroyed. And the strain of the mission left everyone exhausted, knowing they'd pushed themselves to their limits. Still, amidst the chaos, one thing was clear. Humanity and the Valara had faced the abyss together, and survived. The victory was short-lived. Though the device had disrupted the black tide, it wasn't enough to destroy the nanite swarm completely. The glowing pulse of energy faded quickly, leaving behind a churning mass of darkness that seemed angrier and more chaotic than before. The nanites reacted violently to the interference, spreading faster now as if driven by instinct to survive. Back on the surface, Captain Elise Marquez paced anxiously near the edge of the water, her communicator crackling with updates from the submarines returning from the abyss. Kayla and Lieutenant Theo Calder emerged from their craft, both visibly shaken but alive. Their faces told the story even before they spoke. The mission had succeeded, but only partially. "It slowed them down," Calder reported, his voice hoarse from shouting over the chaos below. "But they're adapting. The swarm is spreading again, faster this time." Kayla nodded grimly, her glowing skin dimmer than usual. "We bought some time," but not much. If we don't act soon, the entire system will collapse. Elise clenched her fists, frustration etched across her face. Then we keep fighting, she said firmly. We've come too far to give up now. But time was running out. The strain of the mission weighed heavily on everyone, humans and Velara alike. Supplies were dwindling, equipment was failing, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm even the strongest among them. Morale plummeted as the reality of their situation set in. They had risked everything, and still the enemy remained unbeaten. That night, as the team gathered around a makeshift table littered with maps and schematics, tensions boiled over. Elder Terran slammed his fist onto the table, his deep voice resonating through the room. "Your plan failed," he accused, glaring at the humans. "You promised us hope, but all you've given us is delay. Now what? Do we wait for death while you try again?" "We didn't fail," Elise shot back, her tone sharp but controlled. "Every second counts. Every effort brings us closer to a solution. But if you want to give up now, go ahead. I won't stop fighting, not until there's nothing left to fight for." Her words silenced the room, but the anger lingered. Kayla stepped between them, her presence calming despite the storm brewing around her. "Elder Terran, Captain Marquez is right," she said softly. "This isn't about blame. It's about survival. We can't afford to turn on each other now. Not when we're so close." "Close to what?" Another Valeran elder snapped bitterly. "More failure, more loss." Before anyone could respond, an alarm blared from one of the human ships. Ensign Riley rushed into the tent, panic in his eyes. "Captain, the Aurora's shields are failing. The swarm's reaching critical levels. It's heading straight for us." Chaos erupted as everyone scrambled to react. The Aurora, one of the largest human vessels, was drifting dangerously close to the black tide. Its damaged systems made it impossible to maneuver away. Without warning, a massive wave of nanites surged toward it, threatening to engulf the ship entirely. Elise barked orders, her voice cutting through the noise. "Evacuate the crew. Get everyone off that ship now." But the evacuation wouldn't be fast enough. The Aurora's captain, a grizzled veteran named Hayes, knew what had to be done. Over the comms, his steady voice rang out. "Negative, Captain. There's no time. I'll hold them off. You get the rest of the fleet clear." "Hayes, stand down," Elise shouted, desperation creeping into her tone. "I'm sorry, Mom," Hayes replied calmly. "It's been an honor." Before anyone could stop him, Hayes activated the ship's self-destruct sequence, steering the Aurora directly into the heart of the swarm. With a deafening explosion, the vessel disintegrated, sending a shockwave rippling through the black tide. For a brief moment, the nanites recoiled, their advance halted by the sudden destruction. Silence fell over the group as they watched the fiery remnants fade into the void. Tears streamed down faces, human and Velara alike, as they mourned the sacrifice. Kayla turned to Elise, her voice trembling but resolute. "They gave their lives for us," she said. "We owe it to them to finish this." Elise nodded, her jaw tight with determination. "Then let's make sure they didn't die in vain." With renewed resolve, the survivors vowed to push forward, no matter the cost. The battle wasn't over yet, but thanks to Hayes and the Aurora, they had a little more time to fight. The air, or rather, the water, was thick with tension as the humans stood on the shore of Valara's ocean. Captain Elise Marquez stepped forward cautiously, her boots sinking slightly into the damp sand. Behind her, her crew adjusted their breathing apparatuses, ensuring they could survive in this alien environment. Though their suits were advanced, none of them had ever interacted with an aquatic species before. This was uncharted territory for everyone involved. For the Velara, curiosity warred with suspicion. They gathered in groups near the edge of the water, their glowing forms casting soft light across the beach. Some whispered among themselves, while others kept silent, watching the strangers with wide, unblinking eyes. Kayla swam closer to the front of the crowd, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe these newcomers meant well, but history had taught her people that trust came at a cost. Elis held up the translator device again, its blinking lights pulsing rhythmically. "We mean no harm," she repeated, her voice calm yet firm. "Your distress signals reached us. We've traveled far to understand your plight and offer assistance." The translation echoed through the waves, clicking and humming in the melodic tones of the Velara. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. One elder, a towering figure with deep blue markings, swam forward, his long fins trailing behind him like banners. His voice carried authority when he spoke. "Why have you come now?" the elder asked, his words translated back into human speech by the same device. Many others heard our calls. None answered. "Why do you?" Elis hesitated for only a moment. She chose her next words carefully. "Because we know what it means to face extinction. My people, Earth, our home, was nearly destroyed decades ago. Pollution, war, climate collapse. We brought ourselves to the brink. It took everything we had to rebuild. When we heard your plea, we couldn't ignore it. No one should suffer alone." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The elder studied her face, searching for truth. Finally, he nodded slowly. "You speak of suffering," he said, "but can you truly help us? Our sun is dying. Our oceans are poisoned. What can fragile beings like you do against such forces?" Before Elise could respond, Kayla stepped forward boldly, surprising even herself. "Let them try," she said, addressing both the elder and the crowd. Her voice rang clear, cutting through the skepticism around her. "They've come this far. Isn't that worth something? If they fail, we lose nothing more than we already have. But if they succeed—" She trailed off, letting the hope linger unsaid. The elder considered her words, then gestured toward Elise. "Very well. You may stay. Show us what you can do. But know this, if you betray us, there will be consequences." Elise bowed her head respectfully. "Understood." As the initial standoff eased, the humans set up temporary shelters along the shoreline. Kayla approached them cautiously, intrigued by their equipment. Lieutenant Theo Calder, a wiry man with glasses perched awkwardly on his nose, noticed her hovering nearby. He gave her a small wave and pointed to one of their devices, a scanner analyzing samples from the blackened water. "This thing tells us about your ocean," he explained through the translator. "It's how we'll start figuring out what's wrong." Kayla tilted her head, fascinated. "You really think you can fix it?" Calder smiled faintly, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we'll try. That's what humans do. We try until we get it right." His honesty disarmed her. Slowly, Kayla extended a webbed hand, mimicking the gesture of peace Elise had made earlier. After a pause, Calder shook it, his grip gentle but firm. In that moment, a fragile connection formed, a bridge between two vastly different species united by shared desperation. Above them, the dimming sun cast long shadows over the land and sea. Yet beneath those shadows, a spark of hope began to glow. Far away, the black tide continued to spread. But for now, amidst the ruins of a dying world, humanity and the Velara stood side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In a galaxy far from Earth, beneath the shimmering surface of an oceanic planet called Velara, life teetered on the edge of extinction. The Velara were no ordinary beings. They were aquatic creatures with bioluminescent skin that glowed softly in the dark waters. Their cities floated like glowing jewels among coral reefs taller than mountains. For centuries, they thrived in harmony with their environment, singing songs to the currents and honoring the sun that warmed their seas. But now, silence filled their world. Something was wrong with the star their planet orbited. It had begun to dim, its golden light fading into a sickly gray. Scientists among the Velara studied it closely, but none could explain why their once vibrant sun seemed to be dying. Stranger still, patches of their ocean turned black, lifeless voids spreading faster each day. Fish disappeared, plants withered, and even the great coral spires started crumbling. Panic spread through their society. The Velara weren't alone in the universe. They knew that much. Over decades, they had sent signals into space, calling for help from other intelligent species. They pleaded for answers, for aid, for anything. But time passed, and no one responded. No ships arrived. No voices echoed back across the stars. Other civilizations either ignored them or never heard their cries at all. Despair settled over Velara like a heavy fog. One evening, as Kayla, a young scientist with luminous green markings on her skin, swam through the ruins of what used to be a thriving reef, she felt tears mix with the salt water around her. She thought about how many generations had sung under these waves, only for everything to fade away. Her heart ached, not just for herself, but for the future her people might never see. Then, something happened. A flash lit up the sky above the water's surface. At first, Kayla thought it was another flare from their failing sun, but this light was different. It moved. Curious, she swam upward, breaking through the waves to gaze at the heavens. There, hovering beyond the atmosphere, were shapes unlike anything she'd ever seen. Sleek silver ships, their surfaces reflecting the faint glow of the dying star, descended slowly toward Velara. News of the arrival spread quickly. Fear rippled through the population. Who were these strangers? Were they here to conquer? To scavenge what little remained of their world? Or worse, had they come simply to watch them die? Kayla joined the crowd gathering near the shoreline, where the largest ship landed gently on the sand. A hatch opened, and figures emerged. They walked upright on two legs, their skin pale compared to the vibrant hues of the Velara. They wore suits that shimmered faintly, protecting them from the alien air. At the front stood a human woman with short brown hair and sharp eyes full of determination. She raised her hands in a gesture of peace and spoke words no one understood. Then, a device strapped to her belt translated her voice into clicks and hums, mimicking the language of the Velara. "We are humans," she said. "We heard your call. We've come to help." For a moment, there was silence. The Velara stared at the strangers, unsure whether to trust them. Help? From humans? These fragile beings who lived such short lives. What could they possibly do against a force that had already defeated so many others? But Kayla saw something in the woman's eyes. Hope. Not the kind born of arrogance or blind faith, but the quiet strength of someone who refused to give up. And in that instant, she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, salvation had finally come. Far above, the stars remained silent. But down below, amidst the ruins of a dying world, a new chapter began. The countdown echoed in everyone's ears, a steady rhythm marking the final moments before their most daring move. The fleet hovered near the unstable star, its surface flickering with ominous bursts of energy. Antimatter charges were loaded into launchers aboard each ship, their glowing cores pulsing faintly like hearts ready to ignite. Humans and Velara worked together in tense silence, their movements precise and deliberate. Every second mattered. Kayla stood on the bridge of one of the human ships, her luminous skin casting a soft glow across the dimly lit controls. She had volunteered to stay aboard to assist Lieutenant Theo Calder, who was overseeing the deployment sequence. Her presence brought a sense of calm to the crew, even as fear lingered beneath the surface. "This is it," Calder said quietly, his hands hovering over the console. "No turning back now." Kayla nodded, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "We've come too far to hesitate." As the timer reached 0, the first wave of antimatter charges launched toward the star. Bright streaks of light cut through the darkness, leaving trails of shimmering particles in their wake. One by one, the other ships followed suit, sending their payloads into the heart of the dying sun. On board Captain Elise Marquez's flagship, tension crackled through the air. She watched the monitors closely, tracking the progress of the charges as they approached their target. "Hold position," she ordered sharply, her eyes never leaving the screen. "We need every charge in place for this to work." But the nanites weren't going down without a fight. As the charges neared the star, the swarm surged forward, attempting to intercept them. Dark tendrils lashed out, colliding with some of the projectiles and causing small explosions that lit up the void. "We're losing charges," someone shouted from the comms. Elise clenched her fists, her mind racing. "Redirect power to the remaining charges. We can't afford any more losses." Back on Kayla's ship, an alarm blared suddenly. A cluster of Menites had broken away from the main swarm, heading straight for their vessel. The crew scrambled to evade, but the ship shuddered violently as the swarm collided with its shields. "We're hit," Calder yelled, frantically working the controls. "Shields are failing." Kayla grabbed onto a nearby railing as the ship rocked again. "Keep the last charge on course," she urged. "We have to finish this." With seconds to spare, Calder managed to stabilize the ship just long enough to launch the final antimatter charge. It streaked toward the star, narrowly avoiding the swarm's grasp. Moments later, the charges detonated simultaneously, creating a blinding flash of light that engulfed the star. The shockwave rippled outward, shaking the entire fleet. For a terrifying instant, it seemed as though the plan had failed. The star flared violently, its surface erupting in waves of fire. Then something incredible happened. The gravitational singularity formed at the star's core, pulling the nanite swarm inward with irresistible force. The dark tendrils twisted and writhed, struggling against the pull, but ultimately succumbing to the immense gravity. In mere moments, the swarm collapsed into the singularity, vanishing entirely. Cheers erupted across the fleet as the black tide dissipated, leaving behind clear skies and calm waters. The star stabilized, its golden light returning stronger than before. Tears streamed down faces, human and Valara alike, as relief washed over them. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. Elder Terran floated near the edge of the ocean, his deep blue markings glowing brightly once more. "You saved us," he said to Elise, his voice filled with gratitude. "All of you." Elise bowed her head humbly. "We couldn't have done it without your strength and courage. This victory belongs to all of us." Kayla swam up beside Calder, her glowing smile brighter than the stars above. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," Calder replied softly. "Thank you." Together, humanity and the Valara gazed at the renewed horizon, knowing they had faced the impossible and triumphed.